So, Pinocchio is the latest movie directed by Robert Zemeckis, and it stars Tom Hanks, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Cynthia Erivo, Keegan-Michael Key, Luke Evans, Lorraine Bracco, and it's the remake of the animated Disney movie from the 40s of the same name. In case you don't know what the plot of that movie is, Geppetto's a woodmaker, he creates a wooden boy, he wishes that the boy would come to life, and a blue fairy, uh, you know, makes Pinocchio alive, and now he wants to become a real boy, so he goes on all these adventures of what it means to be a real boy, and you know the movie by now. I don't really need to spoil it. So was a movie that, I'm going to be honest, I was not looking forward to for a multitude of reasons. One, I'm not like the biggest fan of the Disney live-action remakes, but I'm also not the biggest critic of them either. I try to look at them and go, okay, let's see where this goes from here, and a lot of times these days, I'm just really disappointed by them. I was also really disappointed that this movie was going straight to Disney Plus. To me, that just said this movie's not really good enough for theaters, and even though theaters have reopened and are basically running normally at this point, that just seemed odd to me. And also, admittedly, Robert Zemeckis, in his career, yeah, he's directed a lot of iconic movies. He directed Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Castaway. So many really good movies in his career. His career as of late is not really that great, if I'm being honest. The Witches, I hated. Welcome to Marwen, I thought was misguided. And so I was not really looking forward to this movie whatsoever. So, I watched this movie. This is bad. This is bad. I really did not like this movie. Like, at all. There are only a few things that I took away from it that I actually did like. But almost everything else about this movie, I hated. And since this is a movie that's, it's been out since 1940, and they basically just redid it for the most part, but we'll talk about that. This is just going to be a spoiler-filled review, because I don't care anymore. So anyway, what works in this movie? Honestly, the acting for the most part is fine. A lot of the acting is okay, particularly from Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Jiminy Cricket. I don't think he's as good as the original voice actor of Jiminy Cricket, but I kind of like the fact that he did sound like how Jiminy Cricket sounded, at least. Also, Benjamin Evan Ainsworth, I believe that's how I pronounce his name, he voiced Pinocchio in this movie. I thought he did a good job in the movie. Also, Luke Evans was pretty creepy as the coachman, which, get the guy who played Gaston from the live-action Beauty and the Beast to play that character. Already creepy, so that works. Also, Kian Lamea, I believe I'm mispronouncing that name, one of the new characters in the movie. I thought she did an alright job. No one in this movie really gives a great performance by any means, but no one gives a bad... Well, a couple people do, but I'll talk about that. Also, the production design of this movie is actually really interesting. I really like the production design of this movie. Looking at Pleasure Island was really fascinating. The town where, Geppetto and Pinocchio live was very interesting as well. It's definitely a movie that is definitely visually pleasing, at least from production design value. Not for the visuals, but we'll talk about that. And there are some changes that I kind of did like. Like, there's a scene where Pinocchio starts talking, but he's only repeating what other people say. That kind of made sense to me instead of the original where he's like, oh, he's talking and he understands words, but when he's brought to life, he's only repeating words. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because he really wouldn't know how to talk. Okay, I'll let that slide. The other interesting change is that you kind of see Pinocchio go to school at one point, and he's kind of thrown out. That I thought was also kind of interesting. That kind of also led him to to go on all of his adventures from this movie. And that's about it. Everything else about this movie is bad. Everything else in this movie is terrible. Holy God. So, as far as the other performances go, Tom Hanks. Oh, man. Admittedly, this is a better performance than he gave in Elvis, but this is still a really bad performance. Like, his accent goes in and out. I just didn't like it. It just kind of felt odd. It's like they just kind of didn't care. Cynthia Erivo, I honestly did not like her as the Blue Fairy in this movie. I felt that her character was unlike her character, that character was like sweet and knowledgeable. This was just more, she was definitely a lot more sarcastic. And also, I didn't really like that she only has one scene in the movie, and yeah, it's a scene where she sings When You Wish Upon a Star, and other than that, she's not in the movie. And to me, it would make more sense if she was in the movie a lot more. I don't understand why they cut her from this movie, basically. Also, Keegan-Michael Key. Oh, man, I really like Keegan-Michael Key. He's hilarious. But here, I thought, like, him as Honest John is fine, but, like, when he starts telling jokes, it's really bad. His jokes are terrible. Holy God. Like at one point, he tells Pinocchio, he could be famous, and uses the words influencer. And I'm like, you did not just say that, did you? You did not just say that. And it somehow gets worse. He says, you need something more catchier than Pinocchio. And he comes up with a name for him. How about Chris Pine? I'm like, this was the guy who directed Back to the Future, right? This was the same guy, right? Anyway, also the visuals, I did not really care for in this movie. Pinocchio, at first it kind of was a little creepy at first, but it's like I kind of I came around to it because he looked a lot like his animated counterparts. The other ones kind of looked too realistic for the most part, particularly Jiminy Cricket, Honest John. They looked a bit too realistic. Some looked absolutely awful, like Monstro, who isn't even a whale in this movie. He looks like a monster that was a knockoff of King Shark from the Suicide Squad. It looks terrible. It looks unfinished. It just looks embarrassing. And also the scene where, they start changing the donkeys and all that. Lampwick changes into a donkey. It just looks embarrassingly bad. It looks I actually laughed during that scene. Like, looking back at the original Pinocchio before I saw this, I was terrified of that donkey transformation scene. And that still is terrifying to this day. Here, in the donkey transformation scene, I was laughing. That is really bad if I had the exact opposite reaction to a scene done in one of these remakes. And it reminds me of when I saw the Lion King remake. I remember in the original, I cried when Mufasa gets killed. In the remake, when Mufasa gets killed, I felt nothing. How do you do that? You just make it look terrible. That's how you do it. You don't have great visuals. You just make it I'll get into that a little bit later. Again, there's also a lot of the jokes in this movie just do not work. I already mentioned the Chris Pine joke, the influencer joke. There's also a weird joke that's done twice in the opening scene where, Geppetto makes all these clocks and they're characters from Disney movies like Woody and Bullseye and, Roger Rabbit, which obviously it's, Robert Zemeckis. But some are it's just why? Just why? There was a really funny one involving Sleeping Beauty, but other than that, it was just too much. I didn't care for it. There's also a scene where Pinocchio stares at a pile of shit. And it goes on for 30 seconds. Like, it cuts to Honest John and talking to Gideon, and he's still staring at that pile of shit. Who thought that was a good idea? Tell me who thought that was a good idea. This was the guy who directed Who Framed Roger Rabbit, right? Just why? There's only one good joke in this entire movie, and that's when, Pinocchio is going to save Geppetto, and he has this scene where, Geppetto's yelling at him. He's like, "Where have you been? You were supposed to be home last night." And then Pinocchio just basically recaps the entire movie, and Geppetto goes, "You did all that in one day?" That was funny. That was a funny scene. But other than that, that was my main issue about Pinocchio, is that he does all this in one day. Here, it's like they at least call it out saying, "Oh yeah, it's all done in one day." Okay. Anyway, I just thought that was really bad. I just thought the jokes were just terrible. They were poorly written. They were just not funny. I was just done. Obviously, this is not a very funny story, but if you're going to inject humor, at least be funny. I mean, you do have funny people in this movie, like Keegan-Michael Key's hilarious, but it's just not funny. It's just bad. It's just really cringy. Anyway, let's move on. And also another issue that I have with this movie is that the film can't really decide if it's a shot-for-shot remake or trying to do its own thing. Because there are moments in this movie where it is scene for scene and line for line. Pretty much the entire donkey transformation scene is just line for line from the original movie. And it just got annoying after a while. And then they try to do all these different things in the movie, which just don't make any sense. They just have this scene where Pinocchio stares at a pile of shit for 30 seconds. It's just bad. Also, some scenes go by really fast, and again, they're trying to recapture the movie again. Like the whole "When You Wish Upon a Star," like in the Disney opening logo, you have Jiminy Cricket come down and sing the rest of it. It's like, well, isn't that a great song? It's like, honestly, I would like if you sang it a little bit more. And also, again, it feels like a lot of scenes are just done really fast because they just kind of want to get through this so they can get to the new stuff, but then go back to the old stuff. Make up your mind. What are you trying to do? At least the Lion King remake was like, we're just doing a shot for shot remake. That is bad. That is really bad. And also, the music in this movie is pretty forgettable. At least in the original Pinocchio, I can at least still remember some of the songs. Obviously, When You Wish Upon a Star, Got No Strings, Give It a Little Whistle. The music in this movie is just forgettable. I know Tom Hanks has a song. I kind of forgot most of the lyrics. Luke Evans has a song. It's forgettable. Most of the music is just bland. The score, the songs are just so forgettable. Now, let's talk about the things that I really didn't care for, which include spoilers, because I gotta review this movie. I can't review this movie without spoiling it. It's that bad. I just hate it. So there's a lot of things in this movie where it's like, are you really going to develop this more, or are you just going to leave it there? Like, there's this, like, in the opening, Geppetto's, like, he wishes for something. It's not entirely clear what he wished for, because it's implied that his wife and his son are dead, and it's not really made sure if Pinocchio is just a real, if Pinocchio is his own thing, or if Pinocchio is, like, the spirit of his dead son. That's not really made clear at any other point in this movie. They don't really even allude to it afterwards. I'm okay with them, bringing up ideas, but maybe just develop them a little bit better. It just didn't really make sense to me. And also, Pinocchio lying in this movie. Obviously, from the original, every time he lies, his nose grows. And in the original movie, he lies and basically it's a moral lesson. In this movie, it doesn't really work, because in this movie, same thing. He's kidnapped by Giuseppe, he's kidnapped by Stromboli. That's what his name was. He's kidnapped by Stromboli, and in this movie, because there's no blue fairy after the opening scene, Jiminy Cricket finds him, and Pinocchio starts lying, but he's only lying because he's trying to get the key to the cage that he's locked in. And to me, that basically said, okay, so lying is okay as long as it's for your own convenience. I don't know if that's really the best idea for your message for this movie, the one where the most famous message is like, don't lie. That is not a good idea. That really pissed me off. Also, the whole Pleasure Island scene. Now, obviously, it's not a good idea to show kids drinking beer, smoking cigars, and anything like that from, like, the original movie. In this one, they drink root beer, they eat hamburgers, and they mash clocks. Also, Pinocchio gets kidnapped instead of being tricked to go to Pleasure Island. Like, these kids are supposed to be really bad, but these are more like kids who are pretending to be bad and not kids who are actually bad. And I feel like there's a difference between the two. Because, like, with kids who are pretending to be bad, they're like actors trying to do bad things, but then there's like people who just do bad things. And I feel like these kids were just trying to do bad, but like they really couldn't, because the worst thing they're doing is smashing clocks. And also, while we're at it, Pinocchio is not as dim-witted as he was in this movie. Like, at first he just continues to listen to Geppetto, he goes to school and all that, but then he realizes since he's a wooden boy, not a real boy, he can't go to school. And so that's when he's like, okay, I'll go to Stromboli and just do all this stuff and then go on this all these adventures and such. And again, Pinocchio gets kidnapped to go to Pleasure Island instead of being tricked to go to Pleasure Island. And in this one, he's a little bit more concerned over the admittedly less bad stuff, like, again, drinking root beer and smashing clocks and all that. So, it just does... I didn't want Pinocchio to be like a goody two-shoes and do nothing throughout this entire movie, but this movie gets close to it, because he's just not really... I don't want to say he's not acting like a kid, because I feel like a kid would be concerned if they see bad things, but this stuff isn't even really that bad. It's just... You had good ideas, but what were you thinking at times? Now, let's get into the ending of the movie. Obviously, from the original, Pinocchio saves Geppetto and all of Geppetto's pets, and it's just, it's obviously really sad. Pinocchio is dead, and the Blue Fairy grants Geppetto's wish. Pinocchio becomes a real boy. In this movie, it is very different. Very, very different. So instead of Pinocchio dying, it's Geppetto dying. And Pinocchio saves him by singing a few bars of When You Wish Upon a Star. crying tears, and it falls on Geppetto, right out of Tangled, for crying out loud. Geppetto is awake, and he says, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a real boy or not. You are a real boy in your heart. What a cop-out. Like, what a cop-out. For multiple reasons. It's, one, it's a cliche message. Two, what was the point of, Jiminy Cricket becoming a, conscious if he doesn't really get a reward from that afterwards? And I just felt like it kind of took away from the message of the original movie. And at the end, it's like, there's so many things that are implied at the end. Like, let's go off and let's go on, let's leave this place and let's go home. And Jiminy Cricket narrates, this story has been told multiple times, and I don't know for sure if he became a real boy. Are you sure about that? Because there are two things that I noticed. One, his legs are changing. His legs are changing to human. Like, how do you not notice that? And two, like, he's going to a light that's basically the blue fairies, the blue color and all that. It's kind of implied that he does become a real boy. I don't mind if you want to do, like, a new twist on this story, but make up your mind. Just make up your mind. Oh my god. I've ranted about this movie for too long. This movie's not good. This movie is terrible. Holy god, why? Why did this happen? Like, the talent involved is really good. What happened? This was the same guy who directed Forrest Gump, right? Why? Just why? So even though there are a few things I at least appreciated, like a few nice changes, and the production design and some of the performances are really good, some of the performances are really bad. I forgot to mention Lorraine Bracco. Her character's just pointless throughout this entire movie. You could have just had the blue fairy in this movie the whole time, and it wouldn't have mattered. Like, just, I don't know why her character was even in this. The CGI is terrible. Like, there's even a fish that looks realistic, and it looks so creepy when the fish smiles. It just doesn't work. It's so uncanny. I hated the visuals in this movie. I hated the jokes. I hated the messaging of this movie. I hated the ending. I hated the fact that it couldn't decide what it wanted to do, what it wanted to be, and I hated the music. I hated a lot of this movie. It is bad. It is really, really bad. I am looking forward to Guillermo del Toro's stop-motion Pinocchio now, because that should at least be interesting. So, I was initially going to say stream it, because it's like, maybe it could be fun to watch, like a so bad it's good kind of watch, but honestly, it's not even worth that. It's just so bad. It's bad. Like, don't bother. Just don't see this movie. So, I'm giving Pinocchio 1 out of 4 stars. Skip it. I've ranted for too long. How would I not give this a skip it? So, what is your least favorite Disney live-action remake so far? This isn't as bad as The Lion King, but it's close. It's really close. So, comment down below. Subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. I just wish I didn't see this.